15 years ago, humanity was dragged into a terrible war, the price of which was the fate of an entire race. The losses on both sides were unimaginably enormous. The Earth was invaded by countless mad monsters from another world. Their goal was nothing but destruction. And leading the invasion of Earth is the ultimate dragon, the strongest and most ferocious monster imaginable. But at the same time, there were people with superpowers, who fought desperately against an army of monsters. People called them the Seekers, the selfless sacrifice of countless Psychers. Seemed to have put the men on the path to victory. But they're back. And this time it was the same dragon who had survived the last time. But mankind had a prophecy that said the monsters would return in 15 years. So an organization was created to train Psychers. ARC. Gifted children were brought together from birth to prepare for the decisive struggle for humanity, and we were only 3 years away from the fulfillment of the prophecy. There was less and less time left. The new heroes were trained by those who participated in the first war against the monsters. They were called instructors. Some of them couldn't deal with the ghosts of the last war, even though it's been over 12 years. Many of them are still plagued by nightmares, since the new war is only 3 years away. Today is the last day for new students to arrive for training. Most of them weren't even 12 years old, but since they had supernatural powers, it didn't matter. One of these recruits was Lee Khan, only 10 years old. However, despite his young age, he was already the leader of a gang of orphans. For leading an illegal gang, he should have been sent to prison. However, the general felt he belonged at the Ark Academy. Lee Han was very surprised to hear this. He had never noticed any unusual or supernatural abilities before. The general said it's not that simple. And in the future, he's not just an ordinary Psyker, but the one who will save humanity. Lee Khan was promised that from now on he could forget about hunger and sleeping outside. But he could not leave his younger brothers and sisters so easily. The general agreed to his terms without hesitation. He said he would personally take responsibility for the people he cared about. However, such conditions will only be as long as Lee Khan is in the ARC as a Psyker. Well, here begins the story of the greatest of the Seekers, who will save all mankind. In this world, people with supernatural powers are given ranks. Lee Khan's rank isn't that high, so he has to make enough effort to survive. Otherwise, his brothers and sisters will be out on the streets alone again. The first thing Lee Khan saw when he arrived at the academy was a crowd of screaming children. They were clearly looking at something. So that's what this is about, a fight among the students. Despite their special status, they're just ordinary idiots like everyone else. The reason for the fight is because one of the students attacked the other because he thinks he's a pathetic weakling. And in his opinion, and because of guys like this guy, Psychers are hated. Easy for him to say, being one of the strongest students in ARC. Though he was despised by everyone, he was also insanely feared. Plus, he's a Psyker who's been trained, and his abilities are on a whole different level compared to someone who just arrived. He wanted to cripple this boy badly enough to be sent home, if he survived. In his opinion, the others had to thank him for ridding them of so weak a Psyker. It's unlikely an untrained guy could survive an attack with an enchanted stone. Wow. On the first day, Lee Khan found himself at the very epicenter of events. His sense of justice and sympathy was brought to him by the street, and this defenseless boy reminded him of his younger brothers. When he caught the stone, Lee Khan wondered why it flew so slowly. After all, he threw it much more powerfully with just his hand. From that moment on, Lee Han became the main opponent of that arrogant idiot. They got into a big fight, beating each other up as hard as they could. Suddenly, the combat officer and their supervisor at the academy arrived. He ordered both of them to step forward. In a gruff and incredibly confident voice, the officer shouted, "Identify yourself." Well, we already know the blonde guy's name is Del Simon. Since Simon had already been trained, his trait should have manifested itself. The trait is a special skill of the Seeker, but Simon's only mastered psychokinesis so far. Psychokinesis, this ability allows you to move objects with just the power of thought. When suddenly, the curator punched Simon in the stomach with all his might. The blow was so strong that Simon was torn from the ground. The handler started yelling, "So much arrogance over such a small thing? You're just trash." Even Lee Khan, who grew up on the streets, didn't expect this. Having dealt with Simon, the curator approached Han and asked, "Lee Khan, you just arrived today, right?" When suddenly, the handler complimented him on his willingness to help the weak. That deserves respect, which is exactly what a Psyker should be. However, without abilities comparable to psychokinesis, you are even more trash, the curator said and hit Han with even more force. These beatings were punished for breach of discipline. Suddenly the curator yelled again, "Listen to me. In 3 weeks, your first year will begin. If you haven't mastered psychokinesis by then, you're out of the academy. The conditions are unbelievably stiff. On top of that, Lee Han had several broken ribs. He must stay in the academy at all costs. His family's lives depend on it. Oh, yeah. I almost forgot. His name is John Red. And he's an instructor whose goal is to turn trash into warriors with exceptional abilities who will face off against the dragon in the future. The introductory speech was over. Now, it was time to start training. The first of which was the exhaustion run. Red was quite cruel. For the slightest misbehavior, he kicked them out of the academy. Even during the first training, when a few students stopped, he kicked them out of the academy. But Lee Khan is used to this attitude. They had been running for over 5 hours straight. Some of the students were fainting and others were throwing up. But Red was undeterred. The rule of thumb is stop and frisk out of the academy. Ali Khan ran lap after lap without stopping. He is able to endure such exertion, for on the street he often had to run away. What he was really worried about was telekinesis. Simon was physically weak, but he had telekinesis, which meant he had a better chance of staying at the academy. Holy shit, this guy is having the worst day of his life. After he fell off his feet, the instructor came up to him and started yelling, "You lousy trash! Go home to bed." And again, Lee Khan comes to his rescue and helps him up. Red, clearly surprised that after so many rounds, Lee Khan still had the strength to help someone. That act speaks volumes. Red didn't stop him. He realized that during the battle, if something happened, Han would not leave his comrades in distress. Meanwhile, the sun was already setting over the horizon. That means they'd been running for over 7 hours. And finally, Red stops them. The students fell to the floor completely exhausted, and finally relaxed. Based on the first training session, out of 73 candidates, 40 remained. Training is over for the day. Tomorrow, all hell will break loose. During the training period, every morning they will run the same distance as today. It's unbelievable how you can run such a crazy distance in one morning, and then train afterwards. The next morning began their training at the ARC. At 5 a.m., they have their morning run. At 8 a.m., a hearty breakfast to recuperate. And at 9 a.m., the morning classes begin, in which they learn the basics of their abilities. In the first session, they were told that the sources of their strength could be in different places. In the head, in the heart, or in the lower abdomen. To awaken it, you have to use your imagination. After the morning classes at 12:30, they have a hearty lunch to recuperate. Normally at mealtime, everyone sits around in groups of friends. But Lee Khan doesn't have any friends. So he decided to eat with Kuro. Kuro became his first friend not only in Arc, but also in life. Kuro was not a man of great ability or intelligence, but he was a good friend. From day one, a strong dislike developed between Simon and Lee Khan, even though Lee Han didn't like him very much. He recognized Simon's telekinesis skills by now, and they had less and less time for it every day. When suddenly, Kuro became very embarrassed and said in a shaky voice that he too could use telekinesis. Lee Khan turned pale at what he heard. He asked him why he was hiding it, and it would be nice to stop worrying about others and think about yourself. Followed by evening classes, combat practice, and a run, and then showers, dinner, inspection, and roll call. And at 10 p.m., it's lights out. But whether it's Hana, insomnia. This bed is too soft for him. Plus, he's always having thoughts. Showers, food, pillow, and blanket. Living conditions in the academies are much better than on the streets. It's nothing like it used to be. Only, he wants to go home. After 2 weeks of grueling training and sleepless nights, some students had already started to get the easiest techniques in telekinesis. More and more, the boys are acquiring unique abilities. But the Khan, he just can't seem to get his head around it. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how much effort he put into it, it didn't work. He was beginning to think he wasn't talented enough, as he suddenly remembered that he had a friend with telekinesis, from whom he could ask for advice. But there was nothing he could do to help him. And in such a case, there was only one person to turn to for advice. As much as Khan doesn't want that. But he must stay at the academy for the sake of his family. Simon laughed loudly and said, "You came to me to find out a secret, didn't you? Except you won't hear it from me." And then, Lee Han fell to his knees and begged him to tell him the secret of telekinesis. Lee Han would never do that, but his family's fate was at stake. Simon decided to help him, but he warned him that it would be difficult and painful. And that if anything went wrong, he shouldn't whine. What? Is Simon out of his mind? He just stabbed a pencil right into Khan's heart. Does he really want to kill him? Over the academy, A government helicopter flew over, which meant that it had been 3 weeks since the new students had arrived. Red watched everyone from his office window and thought about how fast time was flying, as suddenly a doctor enters his office and shouts joyfully, "Sergeant Red, I knew I'd find you here." That doctor was Dr. Octo, an old friend of his, who hated the smell of smoke. Red inquired as to the purpose of his visit. Octo decided to just see an old friend, and since it had been 3 weeks, the doctor wondered what the sergeant thought of the new recruits. The smile quickly disappeared from the sergeant's face. He said the recruits are all idiots. There's no one worthy. But from his words, among the pile of trash, there are 2 who can be useful. Octo was surprised that among 70 people, only 2 are capable of anything. Red singled out Simon first. He said he wasn't bad, except he had a bad temper. At this point, he was already stronger than anyone who'd graduated from the first level of training. Octa had heard of him. After all, like Simon, the doctor was a graduate of a Saker training school in the UK, and the second worthy disciple he considered Lee Khan, because he is the opposite of Simon. According to him, Lee Khan is very loyal and kind and strong in spirit. He would have made the perfect soldier to rely on. But Ark needs unusual soldiers and superhumans. Without supernatural abilities, Lee Khan won't be here for long. Octo noticed that Red was very upset about Lee Khan, so he decided to defuse the situation and asked him, "And you know what the kids call you?" To which Red simply replied, "Idiot!" Well, let's get started. Today marks the beginning of their first year of training, and everything they've done up to this point will seem like a cakewalk. However, this only applies to those who have been able to master the skills required by the Psychers, namely telekinesis. Also, one of the obligatory and basic skills should be the external manifestation. The outward manifestation is the ability to concentrate bodily energy. Eyes must glow when it's being used. And those who have not mastered the external manifestation will leave the academy immediately. Red ordered all those who had mastered external manifestation to go to Dr. Octo and get in line. The rest of us would go the other way to the agents who would take them home. Whether Han was not completely sure that he would be able to show his skills. Plus, the general is here, and if he sees Khan get expelled from the academy, he and his family will be back on the street. At the signal, the children went in different directions. Some were incredibly happy, while others were crying with grief. Lee Khan, frozen like a statue. He didn't know where to go. He couldn't go home. But if he tried to cheat, it could end up worse. And remembering Simon's lesson, Lee Han decided to give it a try to show his abilities. The day Lee Han came to see Simon for advice, he told him a few secrets by punching a small hole in his chest with a pencil. He made what's called a psycho channel, through which the Khan can draw his energy, and the pain from the wound will help to concentrate on this place. Just keeping his hand on his chest for a few days won't get him where he wants to be. From that day forward, Lee Khan was certain that he had begun to feel a power that seemed long lost. But despite that, he still couldn't awaken his power, and now is the last chance to do it. Of all the cadets, only Lee Khan was left standing. He had spent too long trying to awaken his abilities. Red won't tolerate this kind of behavior from his students and started yelling, "Lee Khan, you have 10 seconds to make up your mind." Red comes up close to Han and says, "A soldier always obeys orders from his superiors." But Lee Han stood still and tried to reveal his talent. For misconduct, Red decided to punish the insolent boy, or the Khan must do something now. Otherwise, he'll be on his way home before he can blink. And then he notices a pen in the curator's pocket, and a brilliant idea pops into his head. But he missed that punch. And his plan is to stab himself with a pen and open a psycho channel. It's not that simple. He missed that punch just to get the pen. Lee Han decided that if nothing was coming out because the channel was closed, he would open it as wide as possible. And with all his might, he stabbed his pen right through his heart. Red grabbed the poor kid and started screaming, "Are you stupid? Are you going to die?" The pain of the wound was unbearable. The tears began to flow of their own accord, no matter how hard the Khan tried to hold them back. But nevertheless, his plan bore fruit. His eyes lit up. He made it. Now he can begin his arc training like everyone else. The price he paid for it is very reasonable. Kuro, with tears in his eyes, ran up to his only friend. He was troubled by the act. However, Lee Khan said that he was fine. Unexpectedly, Dr. Octo presented the Khan with a new development. It's a bracelet-like device that allows you to track your progress at the academy, with all the information that goes along with it. Lee Khan was delighted to receive such a gift. After all, it was the only and first gift he had ever received in his life. But their conversations were interrupted by the shouting of the rad. The distribution process is almost complete. As soon as they are marked on the list, they need to be grouped into classes. There are only 4 classes of academies, A through D. In order to be assigned to each of them, you need to master certain abilities. After 3 weeks of training, if a student wants to advance to the next level, he or she must master his or her skills perfectly. Only 25 out of 70 recruits got into the academy. Suddenly, Red says, "All this time you must have thought I was an idiot. But it's worth some clarity. I'm not just an idiot. I'm the real devil in the flesh for you." Well, it's time for class placement. A class is for the best students, and this year there's only one person, and that's Simon. In Class B has already gotten 4 people, and among them, 5 people in C class and 15 people in D class. Lee Han was insanely happy that he had at least gotten into the D class. He was sure that he would raise his rank very soon, and the rest of us become privates and remain in the care of Instructor Wei. To be honest, Mr. Wei's appearance alone inspired fear. It was huge. The children looked like grains of sand against the rock. He looked even more intimidating than Red. And then Mr. Wei says, "My name is Wei Chen. I'm a weapon arts instructor. It will be hard, but if we work together, we will succeed." The children clearly didn't expect him to be so kind. It gave hope to their souls. Kuro was very upset that he was not in the same class as his friend at the academy. However, Lee Kan promised that he would join him very soon. Immediately after distribution, the privates begin training with Mr. Wei. Wei Chen is amazing. He was perfect with almost any kind of weapon. Despite his huge size and kind character, he was a real nimble killing machine. His goal is to teach the cadets his craft, because they'll need it in the future. Don't forget that in just 3 years, a terrible war awaits them. Mr. Wei decided to begin his lesson with a short lecture. "I think you're wondering why people learn spear and sword skills to fight dragons. The point is, they are psycho equipment, which you will use in battle. Nothing on Earth can absorb energy. However, the skin and bones of dragons not only contain but also transmit this energy. Therefore, weapons made from their materials can seriously injure a dragon." But then Lee Kan had a logical question. Then how were the dragons slain to display such swords of spears? That question made Mr. Wei's throat lumpy. But when he came to his senses, he answered, "Originally in hand-to-hand combat. Back then, a single dragon would kill psychers by the hundreds. Some attacks and supported some allies from a distance. However, it was only possible to definitively slay the dragon with melee weapons. This requires piercing a vital organ and letting psycho energy in. Psychers charged with this task are called strikers. To the public, this information is not available. So the children were very surprised when they heard about the strikers. But before you start practicing, everyone should choose the right weapon for them. The arc arsenal is incredibly huge. But Lee Kan decided to try the training spear to start with. Wei noticed how Han handled the spear. He approached him and said, "So you decided on the spear? The wind currents and the sound of you swinging your spear, which I felt earlier, has a promising aura." Mr. Wei was impressed by how decisively and courageously the Khan had stood up to Sergeant Red. Mr. Wei was sure that his character had been hardened by his past overly harsh living conditions. He immediately realized that Khan is here because he has to fight for what he cares about, namely, his family. Wei, the only one in a long time who is really good with Lee Han. Wei promised to help Lee Han in overcoming all the difficulties. But to do that, he has to give 100% of himself. 2 weeks later, at another training session, Lee Han was sparring with Jose. Lee Han clearly excels at being a master of weapons. He has the reaction, agility, strength, and stamina to defeat every opponent. Even so, Jose was exhausted. He still kept attacking him. In the D class, he's the strongest. Regardless, Lee Kan is the more motivated of the two, and this fight stays on him. Here we are in the 2nd week of freshman year. And Lee Kan, already second to class president Jose, the one who wins the duel with weapons among all heroes of D class, automatically moves to C class. That's why Lee Kan is trying his best to be the best. And he'll probably be the next one after Jose to move up a class. Before his promotion, Jose wants Lee Kan to take his place. However, just wanting him will not be enough. Jose didn't make this decision unanimously. The other students in the class also supported his choice, which means that Lee Kan's level of trust and authority has increased significantly. Being class president is another step on the way to the next rank, which the Khan so desperately needs. And asked for his appointment as class president, Lee Kan came to the sergeant, to which he received a very harsh and rude refusal. and only on one condition could he become class president. Rumors of the upcoming event quickly spread throughout the academy. Not only the students, but also the teachers were talking about it. Everyone knew Sergeant Rita as an incredibly strong but vile man. Now, the condition for Khan to become class president. It's to win a duel with Sergeant Red. Of course, for a man who had been through an entire war, beating up a weak freshman would be a cakewalk. However, he considered it a necessary lesson for him. From every window in the dormitory, everyone was interested in watching the beating. But whether Sergeant Ride will fight him seriously remains a question. But the Khan is clearly serious, especially since he brought his practice spear with him. Let's see what happens. An hour before the fight, in a Class D barracks. And no one else wants to be president? Even with his telekinesis, it's a one-time thing. You want to trust the whole group to this retard? Well, no one from the whole class has run for president. I mean, they agreed in advance that they wanted Han to be class president. Red was puzzled as to why everyone trusted Han so much. However, he had no choice but to accept their choice. But the sergeant made his own terms. Lee Han will become class president, only if he can even touch the sergeant. Well, it was time to fight. Red decided to fight with his bare hands, thinking that would be enough. The terms of combat are very simple. If any part of the sergeant's body, like his knees, touches the ground, Khan wins. But if Han loses, he'll just have to live with it. These were terms that suited both of us. Well, let's get started. The first thing Lee Khan decided to do was to study the sergeant's fighting style. First, he needs to understand how he thinks. Even the Seymour came to see it. Who doesn't give a damn about anything? He thinks Khan is crazy for agreeing to this. Lee Han decided to attack first. The speed of his attacks is truly astonishing. Of course, for a sergeant, it's just a game. He easily dodged every blow. Trying to take the sergeant by surprise, Lee Khan tried to attack him from above. However, that was his big mistake, and Red grabbed him. With his first counterattack, the sergeant broke some ribs on the poor boy. Not wanting to mess with him for long, the sergeant decided to end it by hitting him over the head. Did the sergeant miss, or was Han able to dodge that punch? Either way, the fight will go on. Lihan, horrified, said, "Oh shit, he almost killed me just now." Seeing the painfully familiar look on his face, the sergeant told him, "Lee Khan, it's written all over your face. The dragons and their minions will kill you without hesitation. Minions are those monsters that obey the will of the dragon. Han, still too weak, but they won't care about that either. They come here for one thing only, to take as many souls as possible with them to hell. And in meeting them, Khan will know true fear." Suddenly the Khan says, "Hey Sergeant Red, so your weapon of choice is your tongue? Wow, that's brave, or that's stupid. Either way, the fight goes on." Lee Khan persistently and unsuccessfully continues to attack the sergeant, and each of his attempts ends the same way. But persistence is his strong suit. When suddenly Sergeant feels a slight burning sensation on his left cheek. Had the Khan managed to hurt him after all? The sergeant clearly wasn't expecting this. Neither did the rest of the cadets. They were just thrilled about it. Their morale was sky high. No matter how many times, Khan has never been defeated. He's gone into battle again and again. He believes he can still defeat the sergeant. Meanwhile, Red began to take the Khan more seriously. He wondered about the method of his attacks, or rather, at what point he was able to wound him. Thinking about it, the sergeant let the Khan pass behind his back, but in time, he was able to dodge it. But Khan continued to attack again and again without stopping, as Han suddenly began to accelerate his body turns, creating a vortex, and a visual disturbance to his opponent. Now Red understands why he was praising Khan in these. The sergeant was excited about this attack. He wants to see what Lee Han is capable of. And just to put that to the test, Red decided not to dodge that punch. The final blow. Wow. The force was so strong that the spear broke and shattered into tiny pieces. The wound was incredibly deep, as if inflicted with a real sword. Damn it. It was Khan's last chance for victory. But even after that, the sergeant didn't fall to his knees, pulling out the rest of the spear in his body. The sergeant grabbed the boy by the neck and lifted him off the ground. Without a weapon, Lee Khan has no chance of success. On top of that, the sergeant's hand clenches tighter and tighter. Red is wild-eyed and screaming, "You've got no brains at all. Give up already." But Lee Khan is different. He won't just give up. So the sergeant decided to use his magic to make him admit defeat. Even the most heartless, cruel students realized that the sergeant was overreacting. But no one dares to stand up for Lee Khan. The sergeant gripped his hand tighter and tighter, which was burning hot with flames. Han had two choices: surrender or die. But despite the terrible pain, the desperate situation, Han refused to give up. That's a man of steel. Anyone in his position would have given up before the duel even began. When Mr. Wei saw this outrage, he didn't stand idly by. He decided to stop the fight. Only Wei's scream could stop the sergeant, and in the end, neither of them lost the duel, which means the sergeant's reputation will be in question, even though it was very cruel. Red was acting within the laws of the academy, except Mr. Wei didn't quite agree with them. There was a huge uproar in the arena over the whole thing. Some thought Han had lost, and some thought otherwise. So that unnecessary rumors wouldn't be wasted in the academies, the sergeant decided to clarify what was going on. He told everyone to shut up. When everyone had quieted down, he said, "So be it. If he doesn't give up, he'll win." This decision greatly surprised the cadets, for the sergeant had a reputation as a heartless man. Wei decided to take Khan to the hospital together to get him first aid. As he left, the sergeant said, "Your softness will do you no good. Mark my words." The other students were delighted at how long Han had lasted, and despite the incredible pain, he had not given up. Even those who had previously been prejudiced against him began to respect him. And yes, the sergeant ordered Li Khan to be transferred to Class B as soon as he regained consciousness. Still, the sergeant's a strange man. Cruel, but fair at the same time. A week later, the sergeant went to the hospital to check on Khan. And on the way to see him, he told the doctor that he wanted to enroll him in the B class. The girl was greatly surprised, as it was not often that she jumped over a whole level. However, she was worried about how the other students in the class would feel about it, and then Red admitted that he could have easily put him in the A class. But Khan's mental capacity is still low, which is exactly what most upperclassmen are worried about. That's the reason the sergeant thinks they're all idiots. Because in the battle with the dragon, it is not so much the proverbial psycho abilities that are important, but a huge force of will to face fear and thrust the spear into the enemy's weak spot, and Li Khan has it, which is why he's going to be the best striker in the game. It is unacceptable to dismiss such a talented candidate just because of his slow development. Perhaps in the future, it will be Li Khan who will be the savior of the world. The girl couldn't help but notice how much admiration he spoke of Khan. It seemed to her, as much as to anyone else, that the sergeant hated him. Another week later, the doctor notices Mr. Wei standing by the door to Han's room, hesitant to enter. He seems to be the only one in this academy who really cares about the students. A girl asked the instructor why he hadn't come into the room in 10 minutes, but the reason was very simple. Wei just didn't want to get in the way. Han had recovered remarkably quickly from the fight with the sergeant. He had already begun practicing his psycho energy. So far, the result is weightless. However, with this approach, he's clearly going to be the strongest of all those before him. And, as a result of the original, he managed to awaken his hidden power. Such determination and perseverance is simply astonishing. Mr. Wei and Han's attending physician were insanely happy that the boy had done well. After waiting, Mr. Wei decides to go to the Khan and see how he's doing. Mr. Wei has become Khan's favorite teacher. And don't forget that Mr. Wei is the reason why Khan is doing well. Han will start B-class training tomorrow. We praised Han for not wasting time and for practicing his strength. But despite this, Khan's mental level is still below average. However, he is the best with weapons. When all of a sudden, Wei says, "Han, you're doing well. I've never seen students as diligent as you. You're moving in the right direction. A Saker should not only be skilled in combat, but also good at psychokinesis. Most battles are fought in the air, and if you somehow drop your weapon, you have to get it back. That's why you need telekinesis." When suddenly Mr. Wei lights up, he comes up with something to help the Khan. That's why, offering knights, he brought him to the training room, to tell him his idea, without the need for ears. All of a sudden, Instructor Wei says, "Han, based on the slow development of all your abilities, I conclude that the likelihood of awakening chakra is minimal. Others with mana ways to start a fire or teleport, but you'd better forget it." But then how do you fight, you ask? It's simple. Concentrate on practicing psychokinesis, and then psychokinesis will become your specialty. Han was incredibly moved by those words. He thought that psychokinesis might actually be his ace up his sleeve. Psychokinesis is like a muscle. The more you use and train it, the stronger you become. The initial levels of this ability are just an illusion. But the Khan generation, compared to the elders, has a huge potential. Wei became a kind of similar mentor for Khan. Li Khan trusted every word and advice of his friend and mentor. Therefore, he firmly decided that he would train psychokinesis to reach the highest level in it. Well, the day has come, the first day of Khan in B class. Han was visibly nervous. He didn't know how the other students would receive him, and the first thing Han did was make a mistake. He crashed into one of the academy's biggest bullies. Han was ready to be beaten up on his first day in his new class. However, when the boy saw the Khan, he was even a little happy. Lee Khan was surprised and asked how he knew him. But after that duel with Sergeant Khan, the whole academy knows. And then the guy says, "By the way, my name is Kier. I'm Class B president." Han came just in time. After all, his new class is having a martial arts class right now. That's the thing about martial arts. Han is a true professional. That's why he won't embarrass himself in his first class. Despite his confident appearance, Han is constantly nervous that he could be kicked out of the academy at any moment. It's only in armed combat classes that Han can rest his head a bit. Even in Class B, Khan was unrivaled in his weaponry. He could easily take down any of his opponents. Khan threw everyone to the floor indiscriminately. No one was able to offer him a decent resistance, but among those that Khan beat up was his friend Kuro. When suddenly someone shouted out, a trait of Kuro psycho ability. So is it fun to humiliate someone who isn't as strong physically? Hearing this, Han says, if you could use your abilities in a fight, you'd be nothing left. Kier, who was watching from the sidelines, he was really excited. Since he was the strongest in the class, he wanted to try to fight the Khan towards the end of class. When the duel started, everyone wanted to pair up with Kuro because they knew he never attacked first. To the others, he was like a punching bag, despite the fact that their class was quite close-knit. During sparring, everyone felt it was their duty to hit a Kuro on the head at least once, and every time he begged for mercy. But now, he's not alone in the classroom, and for the third time, he's saved by the Khan. Han doesn't have many friends, and he values each one as much as he values himself. That's why he's ready to help in times of need, when suddenly an enraged Han screams, "Hey, Kier! So this is what it's like in this class, training matches. You mob beat up the weak?" To which Kier replied, "Such methods. Enemies don't spare the weak, and if you don't like it, get out of here." Kier, Khan is not supposed to be in this academy. He's always bailing everyone out of trouble, at great personal risk. In real combat, it could cost lives. Those words made sense. For if such a thing had happened in real combat, they would not have been killed. And Han understood that. Regardless, Kier recognized that a threesome beating up a weak and unarmed man was stupid. I don't know. When suddenly Kier speaks up, "Come on, Khan. Let's show them what a real fight is." Han wasn't going to back down. To be honest, he was interested in fighting him himself, and see what the Class B president could do. What a rat. It's a sneak attack. That's the essence of Kier's personality. He's pathetic and despicable. But once Han had agreed to fight, there was no retreat, and he blocked the first punch. You have to admit, Kier is pretty strong. If Han tries to block his attack with his spear again, it will break. So we need to come up with a new plan. And Han has one. Instead of blocking the attack, he just dodged it. And once he was behind his opponent, Khan knocked out his knee to immobilize him. Kier has never fought the likes of Khan before. Lee Khan uses not only strength, but also intelligence. That's it. With that level of weapon proficiency, he really could have gone straight to A class. And no, not all of it. I clearly underestimated Kier, as did Khan. The only thing I don't understand is why Kier got so close to Khan. What kind of a punch is that, anyway? They're having an armed duel. Kier's probably just afraid of losing his reputation to an ambitious newcomer. It's a miracle Khan's skull didn't crack after that. Well, there's definitely a concussion. Through creepy laughter, Kier says, "You continue to follow more than just my sword. I started karate as soon as I could walk. If I catch you, I'll break every bone in your body." Despite this, Han was on the verge of losing consciousness. He decided to get up and continue the fight. "I wonder if in a fight with a dragon you'll break his bones too," Han asked. Kier joked about it, said if it smelled bad he'd strangle the dragon. And he's pretty confident, even though he's still a student. The whole group watched their duel. And naturally, they supported Kier. His classmates even gave him a battle nickname, Siberian Tiger. And then, Kier turned to his classmates and said, "You're a bunch of miserable, pathetic assholes. I'm done with this idiot. I'll take you." After saying that, he started laughing as if he had heard a joke. Hana was surprised to see such a relationship among his classmates. It was the first time in his life that he had ever seen people insult each other for the sake of a joke. Han has finally figured it out. Their friendship is strong, and Kier is the centerpiece of the company. But Kuro doesn't fit in, and Kier speaks again. "Enough jokes, have you forgotten what we're here for? Han, don't you dare turn your back on me." They had already fought for over 10 minutes. There was no point in continuing any longer. Their weapons are at the highest level of proficiency, and today they will not know who is the stronger of the two. as suddenly, Han Kier's weapon shattered into small shards. Kier had been trying to break his spear from the start, and all to engage in hand-to-hand combat, which he will clearly win. He won unfairly, but winners don't win. But then Han yells, "You haven't won yet. I'm not giving up," thanks to his vast experience in karate. Kier had no trouble taking Khan down with a painful hold. Kier offered to let him go in exchange for Khan surrendering. Otherwise, he would have to break Khan's arm. But Khan's impenetrable character does not allow him to just give up. After all, he did not give up even when they tried to burn him. Kier, in a fit of emotion, broke the Khan's arm. The crunch of his bones was forever etched in the minds of the disciples. The pain was unbearable. But Han's spirit was not broken. He still hadn't given up. From worrying about his other Kuro, cried like a little boy. No matter what, the Khan did not surrender. Cyrus thought that the fight was over. As he left, he said, "I gotta hand it to you. You don't whine about a broken arm. Take the poor guy to the doctor. And if they ask what happened, just say he fell." But Han couldn't pass up an opportunity like this. So I decided to attack Kier from behind, just like he does. Eye for an eye, so to speak. Towering over his fallen rival, Khan says, "So all your opponents before me were whiners, crying like babies over one fracture?" But Kier just kept quiet. He only made Khan angrier. "Get up! We're not done yet!" Han shouted. But even after that, Kier just remained silent and unmoving. Han was surprised that he was able to knock out the class president so easily with a single blow. The same evening, Kier wakes up in the hospital room. He has no memory of how he got here. What a surprise! On the next bunk was Han with a broken arm, who was watching some video intently. It was a video message from the general. Han had met all his expectations and more, so he doesn't have to worry about his family. The general promised that in the next message he would take down his brothers and sisters. Hearing this, Kier understood everything at once. When he saw his younger siblings, Khan couldn't hold back his tears of joy. Now that he knows they are safe, he is at peace. "Oh, you're awake now. I hope you're okay. Can you help me and flip to the next picture?" asked Han. Kier was very confused when he heard Khan's request. After all, he thought that after their duel, Khan would hate him. Overstepping his doubts, Kier asks the Khan, "Why are you doing this? Why are you even asking me to do this?" Khan shows his broken arm and says, "See the broken arm? It's your fault." Kier became indignant and said, "I have a crack in the back of my head. You're the one who hit me from behind like a coward. It's like he didn't do it himself. Plus, this is the kind of fighting methodology promoted in the ARC." But still, a sense of justice prevailed. And Han apologized for sneaking up on him and hitting him in the back of the head. Even though he looks like a thug, he's still a good man at heart. And he suggested to Khan that next time we fight properly. And then Han thought about what he'd done wrong. He realized he just needed to be around the resort and not fight his abusers. When suddenly, Kier's face changed dramatically. And he said, "Look, I don't want to scare you, but we may not survive sophomore year." And to prove his point, Cyrus decided to show something to the Khan, so he could see for himself. "This is interesting. Kier has brought Khan to the emergency room, is where you're considered alive as long as you're breathing. This is where all the wounded and dead are brought. It's hard to even imagine the kind of training he goes through. If he goes to the hospital in serious condition afterward, when all of a sudden Han says, 'Look, that guy looked more like an instructor than a student. How old do they put us in sophomore year?' The thing is, when you go into the second year, they give the privates a drug. It accelerates growth and physically makes a child an adult. It's only done because the dragon is only 3 years away, and no one's going to wait for the children to grow up naturally." Han abruptly became sullen and said in a whisper, "Beautiful." Because growing up, that was Han's dream before he got to the ARC, to protect his family. He went to great lengths to survive, and every time he had to fight the adults. And every time he faced an adult in his life, he lost. So his main dream was to become an adult as soon as possible. And then Han speaks up. "To hell with happy childhood and Christmas dinners. Surviving is what really matters." Kier, once again I'm convinced that Khan's character is ironclad compared to everyone else in ARC. Well, it's time for my first class since being discharged from the hospital. And it's a practical lesson from airborne training. Because, during the war, most of the fighting will take place in the air. Their lives will depend on their success in this lesson. The practical part starts in 16 hours. And first they need to check their equipment thoroughly. This will be Khan's first lesson in the air. It would seem that he should be very worried. But no. When suddenly, Han notices that their bags are full of enough supplies to last a couple days. Han was beginning to have doubts that they were going on a routine training exercise. It would most likely be a wilderness survival test. Some of the cadets have already started eating their food. I think they're going to regret it. What a surprise. Simon is also being sent to this class. It's weird because originally only B students were supposed to go. Kier had a personal dislike for Simon because of his overly pompous personality. But now is not a good time to get into it. In the wilderness, they'd better all work together. Simon didn't understand why the Khan and Kier were looking at him so suspiciously. When all of a sudden Sergeant Red yells, "Stop sitting around like idiots! All aboard now! We're leaving soon!" I wonder what lies ahead for them all. This is their first lesson in which to die. But if they act coherently, they can all make it back. Lee Khan, in the beginning there was only your image, and then you came to me, and now no matter how long I wait, you're gone. Does that mean you won't save me this time? Finally, Kuro has met the problems of the real world. And this time, Khan won't help. An hour earlier, a group of helicopters set off from the Ark Academy to an operations zone in a tropical jungle. All the cadets were incredibly nervous, even though they tried to hide it. They were nervous because they knew what was ahead of them. As suddenly, all the students got a text message on their bracelets. "You are over a desert island. Once we've landed, we'll start practicing survival skills." Now it all falls into place, which is why the backpack had so many provisions. Near the island, there will be a boat with instructors on duty 24 hours a day, for emergencies. The students were very frightened. They did not understand why they were sent so suddenly and without warning to a deserted island for 2 days. Anyway, it'll be a good lesson for future Sakers. They will be able to test their skills in the real world. Before the start, Sergeant Red says the cadets will be on a desert island for a week. It's going to be tough, because spend only 2 days and half the cadets have already eaten some of their supplies. Some of the students couldn't even land on the island properly and fell into the open sea. Sergeant Red, pulling them out of the water, said, "You're pathetic. If I wasn't here, you'd be dead." Thanks to the bracelets Dr. Octo made, the sergeant can track the location of all the students. Mentor, I wondered whether the students would act alone or cluster in small groups. At first glance, Sergeant Red may seem indifferent to the fate of the students. However, deep down, he cares deeply about each of them. A few students formed a gang and started attacking fellow students, arguing that there are no limits in real life. And why starve when you can take food from the weak? They clearly misunderstand what teamwork is. Interesting. There was some white-haired guy leading this group. Looked a lot like Simon. This guy's got a bunch of real moral assholes around him, who would gladly betray their fellow students for profit. His gang started going through the other students' stolen provisions. All of a sudden, the guy says, "What are you doing? I told you to collect as much and as little as you could before sundown. You think I set this whole thing up just so I could do the proverbial divide?" And that's what his team thought, that they would take food from the others and just sit through the whole ordeal. But the guy wanted to rob everyone on this island, to show he's in charge of this academy. The morale of his crew was off the charts, so they decided to try to rob Khan, Kier, and even Simon. Who is this madman? It's not that important, though. It's much more important that he has high leadership skills. And meanwhile, Lee Han comes out of the water on the beach. He, like some other students, fell into the water. Except he did it because his parachute didn't open. Looks like someone set a trap for him. He'd lost too much time getting out of the water. He was well aware that some of the students had already banded together. They could attack him at any moment. The first thing Khan needs to do is find a secluded spot that will be his base of operations. Then someone who's never known hunger, 2 days' rations wouldn't be enough. But Khan, from the day he was born, went hungry every day. Han realized that in a critical situation, most students would start robbing each other for food. Suddenly, Khan was curious. Did Simon and people like him ever starve? And meanwhile, Kier and Simon have finally met. And now, they can't finally figure out who's the stronger of the two. But here, Simon wasn't interested in that. He was determined to focus on survival. And every drop of energy counts. Plus, Simon's completely confident in himself. And he doesn't see Kier as a rival. Well, Kier thought Simon was just afraid of him. But he made a promise to himself that he'd fight Simon sooner or later. The first day of testing on a desert island has come to an end. Kuro's cries for help, a gang of primates came. Once again, Kuro came face to face with the real world. They took everything he had without a second thought, shouting to his classmates as they walk away. "Wait, since you took all the supplies, can you at least get me out of here?" In fact, the resort is still very lucky that he wasn't beaten up, just robbed. Now all he has to do is wait for the instructors to help him, taking everything they wanted. The bandits set out for camp, leaving their Kuro in a tree. Anyway, no one's ever died in a week of hunger strike. And judging by the clouds, it's going to rain soon, so he won't die of thirst either. Night has already fallen, and he's still hanging from that tree, hungry and exhausted. And only Simon's words to him at their first fight keep him from giving up. Well, he wasn't always like this. Even in kindergarten, he was constantly humiliated and called names for his unusual eyes. And over time, he became withdrawn and cried over every little thing. He didn't understand why everyone was being so mean to him. Everyone around him did nothing but insult him. Only Lee Khan was an exception. It was already deep into the night. Kuro didn't even have the strength left to call for help. It looked like he'd have to resign himself to hanging like this for a week, when suddenly, seconds before he lost consciousness, he saw something that looked like Phantom Khan. Interesting? After only a few minutes, the Khan does find him. Could it be the stress of the situation has given Kuro the gift of foresight? Han, at first, didn't even notice him. Now he faces a difficult choice: help his friend or leave him to grow stronger. It was the morning of the second day. Khan, trying to make a spear for food. And yet, the Khan could not leave his friend in distress. But he did not just take him down from the tree, but also took him with him to the camp. Whoa, that's interesting. So the students were given knives, and the hen could have escaped from the trap at any time. But why didn't he? Because the supplies were stolen. Han decided to split his rations between the two of us. It was not the first time he had been hungry, so it was not a big problem for him. Kuro knew perfectly well that he was only a burden and a hindrance to the Khan. So he refused to eat, and said it was his own fault that he had lost his supplies, when suddenly, like a madman, he started shoveling food into himself. Apparently, hunger was stronger than Kuro's will. During the meal, Kuro even cried. He was madly grateful to the Khan for being so kind to him, but not now. After breakfast, Han decided to find a source of drinking water. This is interesting. Apparently, with the help of the drones, the handlers are monitoring the situation on the island. Meanwhile, Sergeant Red studied the materials from the previous day. I wondered what he wanted to see on them, when suddenly, Dr. Octo decided to keep his friend company. The first thing the doctor asked was how the survival exam was going. The sergeant said through a crazy smile, "You're gonna laugh your ass off. One of the students has gone crazy. Look, this crazy student was Knut Meyer from Norway. I thought no one in their right mind would sit on a desert island for a week. He understood the mission in his own way. The main goal was to survive. From a parachute and a few logs, the Knut made a small fetus, on which he returned to the academy. And meanwhile, Khan and Kuro found a source of drinking water. They took a small supply and decided to go in search of food. The only thing they didn't realize is that their island is in the middle of the ocean, and it's incredibly hot during the day. So they decided to sit out the heat in the camp. But Khan had a new problem. He had originally calculated his rations for one man. But now there were two. Except that on this island, there was no sign of any food, not even any coconut palms. As suddenly, Kuro grabbed Khan by his jacket with a shout, "Stop!" I wonder if Kuro really does have the gift of foresight. The trap was not lethal, but Han would have spent a lot of time and energy getting out of it. Except Han had a logical question. "Look, how did you find out about her?" Before the guy could say anything, Han realized it all himself. He shouted, unable to contain his joy. "Impossible! Kuro, you're a visionary." It's strange that Kuro is the one with this ability. He's physically incapable of doing anything, but with this ability, he'd make an excellent support. Han wondered how long Kuro had had this ability. However, this training is a great opportunity to showcase and develop your skills, especially for Kuro. Meanwhile, a gang of primates has paid a visit to their camp. Luckily, Han is savvy enough, so they carry their backpack with them. At first, they wanted to raise their tent to the ground, but in the end, they decided to wait for them and ambush them. Khan and Kuro practically walked back to camp, when suddenly, Han notices that there was someone in the camp, because the stone he left on the tent fabric is now lying on earth. And if you look closely, there's a lot of footprints around the camp. Two of them had come to the tent, and the others were waiting for them at the side. After thinking it over, Han says, "If all these guys are in on it, there's a good chance they'll take all our stuff. So let's pack up and go." They've been walking all day. They need to find a place to sleep as soon as possible, before it gets dark. When suddenly, the Kuro froze and became covered in a red aura. Apparently he's covered in it as part of his precognitive process. I wonder what he sees this time. Holy shit, a black panther. That explains why there are no small animals on this island. On his own, Han is unlikely to deal with such a predator. And then, Kuro sees the prediction as a panther attacks the Khan. In a matter of seconds, he tossed Khan aside, before he could explain. But a moment later, Han Yi realizes it all. A huge and ferocious panther leaps out in front of him just centimeters away. As luck would have it, Han had also dropped his spear. Now he was alone with the beast. There was little hope for the Kuro. Like a friend, the panther roared. But not with anger, but with pain. Wow, isn't Kuro as hopeless as it may seem at first glance? One blow was enough to send the panther running back into the jungle. Han was ready to say goodbye to his life. Oh, I see. I thought it was Kuro who saved Han. That's his former classmate Jose. Good thing he got here in time. Han, it was maddening to see his old friend. Under these circumstances, now he owed him. Han couldn't help but notice that Jose was seriously injured in the leg. Jose said that some crazy person had set traps all over the island. And he fell into one of them, and because of this wound, he can't even stand up properly. Han and Kuro also told me they'd stumbled into the bottom of the trap. They think it's the work of the same person. When all of a sudden, Jose asks the guys, "By the way, have you heard there are thieves on the island?" And then Jose added, "But I'm not in any danger of that, as soon as I found out there were thieves on the island. I ate all the supplies so they wouldn't steal anything." While we weren't talking, night fell, and they still don't have a camp. Well, I think it's time I told you about this guy's story. A long time ago, and completely by accident, he was diagnosed with psychic powers, and that day, everything changed. Before Carl came to the ARC, he appeared in various movies and commercials. Many people thought he would have an excellent career as an actor in the future, except his father didn't see it that way. He wanted Carl to be a psyker. I mean, his father wanted to be a sacker, but he doesn't have the psychic ability. His father was obsessed with the idea of the Sickers. He brainwashed little Carl with promises that after the war, Carl would become the most powerful man in the world. Don't want to, Carl did go to the academy, at his father's behest. All of a sudden, Kier and Simon are teaming up. Although on the other hand, it's quite logical. The two strongest students will work together. Well, even they had food shortages. They were stretching out the food as long as possible. But by now, it was becoming clear that they wouldn't have enough. Between them, there was some disagreement about the future. Kier believed that a Saker's primary skill should be physical. But Simon here, he thought a Seeker should be based on psychic ability. And then Kier had a brilliant plan. With a heavy sigh, he said, "Oh, how I miss Lee Khan. He seems to be the only one who can defeat me in a gunfight." And the genius of this plan was that Simon would go berserk at the mere mention of the name Lee Khan. So he easily agreed to the duel, and meanwhile, in one of the caves, Jose, Khan, and Kuro decide to team up. Khan and Kuro will get firewood and food, and Jose, since he can't walk, will be a guard. Plus, Jose has the strongest fire magic to ensure the safety of their camp. So any way you look at it, he's perfect for the role. In the depths, the islands of Khan and Kuro, we found a freshwater lake that's teeming with fish. Now the problem of supplies doesn't seem so serious anymore, but the Khan became sad. Looking at the fish, he said, "At first I thought helping you was the right thing to do, but then I realized that's not true. And if I always help you, you won't survive the real war." But I was wrong. The last few days on the island, I'm just convinced you're a psycho genius. That's why you're strong enough to save not only me, but yourself. From now on, we'll protect each other to the end. We are friends. In an orphanage in Japan, he was an ordinary child who didn't even have a name. He was named Kuro only because of his dark skin tone, because from the Japanese Kuro, it means black. Even among the orphans, he was an outcast. He was hated by everyone. But now he has a friend who believes in him. Well, it's time to get ourselves some dinner. Using the gift of foresight, Kuro easily anticipates the fish's movements. Han caught himself thinking that Kuro was a genius who had mastered psychokinesis even before joining the Ark, combining the gift of foresight and superior telekinesis. Kuro easily caught the first fish, followed by the second and third, on just the third day of survival. Khan and his team easily found a source of food water. That's commendable. The boys couldn't wait to show Jose their catch, hoping to cheer him up a little, when suddenly Han ran headlong toward the camp and ordered the Kuro to wait for him here. Han, acting so strangely, because he saw that the entrance to their cave was completely destroyed. Once inside, Han saw Jose barely breathing. The whole place had been destroyed and looted. This was definitely the work of Carl and his company. Back to our friends Simon and Kier. Simon asks Kier, "You guessed it wasn't just airborne training, right? Otherwise, there's no reason to bring two swords." Well, Kier joked that he wanted to learn to fight with a weapon in both hands. He wondered why Simon had agreed to it after all. And then Simon says, "If you and Khan really fought on equal terms, then you're really strong, Kier. I hear you're transferring to us. Let's see if you're worthy." It looks like Simon is serious and isn't going to give in to Kier. This was exactly what the B-class president had been waiting for. It was his dream to fight the best student of Arc. Here we go. They both ran forward at each other. Simon, in battle, always relies on his intelligence and psychic abilities, while Kier relies on physical strength and surprise. They're both incredibly strong, that's for sure. Except they have a different approach. Simon, surprisingly quick to touch Kier's chest with his sword, without feeling any resistance. Yet that was part of the plan. He wanted to take Simon by surprise. But it wasn't that simple. Simon was able to realize his opponent's next move in time. With a previous attack, Cyrus had forced Simon to increase his distance, thereby putting him on the defensive. The speed of the attacks and counterattacks was astonishing. Simon and Kier fought to the limit of their abilities, and there it was, the fatal misstep. In the couple of seconds that Kier was disoriented, Simon had just enough time to come at him from behind. This time, Kier was able to dodge. He would have to be more careful from now on. Next time could be his last, thanks to his karate skills. Kier was able to dodge a stabbing blow in surprise, because Simon put all his power into that punch. After he missed, he lost his balance. Kier took the opportunity to knock the sword out of his hands. It seems the outcome of the battle is a foregone conclusion. Kier had been waiting for this moment since his first days at the academy, to put the #1 upstart in the entire academy in his place. It was his dream. And Kier was one step away from fulfilling it, before the blade could touch Simon. Kier felt a blow from behind him. The thing is, Simon used his telekinesis, and he used his sword to stab me in the back. It wasn't fair, but as we know, there's no judgment. However, Simon admitted that in a fair armed fight, he would have lost. But to justify his action, he mentioned that the Psychers use all possible methods to win. Simon looked calm, but he thought that Han was stronger than Kier, and he'd barely beaten him, and it wasn't fair. Meanwhile, in the Khan's camp, Jose regained consciousness, even though he'd been through a lot. He remembered everything perfectly. They were sitting around thinking about a new plan of action. Suddenly, Han asks, "Jose, who was that?" Jose thought long and hard about whether to tell the Khan or not. But finally he did. That Karl Heinz and his gang of 7 idiots did it. Han realized that such actions could not be forgiven. If he didn't stop Karl now, it might be too late. Especially since he had made a promise that he would do his best to protect his friends. But in this case, revenge. From now on, Han, Kuro, and Jose are real amigos. The first order of business, while they still have time, is to find a new hiding place. After sunset, Han and Kuro returned to their former camp. As they had expected, Karl and his gang had taken up residence there. They will begin their plan of retaliation as soon as the resort is ready, to utilize his precognitive abilities. Han, I'm glad I brought Kuro. He couldn't have done it alone. But together, they have a good chance of winning. What's up? It's time to get down to business. Now they're about to learn the true power of telekinesis. With his first attack, Kuro was hit in the knees, thereby immobilizing the guards, and put them out of the game. Predictably, the shouts of the guards drew the attention of Karl and those inside the cave. Karl immediately realized that they were walking into a trap. Out of the cave, the so-called backup ran out. They ran like idiots straight into the hands of Khan and Kuro. But thanks to the gift of foresight, the resort saw their every move. That's why he easily killed each of them in a matter of seconds. And those who still managed to get close to them met Khan on their way. Naturally, Han easily killed anyone who stood in his way. After all, his main target was Karl. Well, they've met, and now Karl will have to answer for all his deeds to the Khan.